Caleb Thornton dropped to his knees on the frozen platform, his hands trembling as he stared at the woman in the wheelchair. 7 years of loneliness. 17 letters filled with hope. And she had lied to him about the one thing that mattered most. "I'll get back on the train," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. "I should never have come." But Caleb didn't move. He couldn't. Because in that moment, looking into her terrified golden eyes, he saw something he recognized, a soul as broken as his own. Stay with me until the end of this story, and subscribe to my channel. Comment your city below so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The morning train pulled into Bitter Creek Station with a scream of iron and steam that split the frozen December air. Caleb Thornton stood alone on the platform, his breath coming out in white clouds, his heart hammering against his ribs like a wild horse trying to break free. 7 years. 7 years since he'd watched his brother die in his arms on a blood-soaked battlefield in Georgia. 7 years since he'd fled west, running from ghosts that followed him across every state line. 7 years of building a ranch from nothing, of talking to horses because there was no one else, of convincing himself that loneliness was what he deserved. And now, on this frozen December morning in 1879, 3 days before Christmas, Caleb Thornton was waiting for a woman he'd never met to step off that train and become his wife. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad," Old Pete muttered from behind him, lighting his pipe with gnarled fingers. The station master had seen plenty of mail-order brides come through Bitter Creek over the years. "She coming in on this one?" "That's the plan." "Nervous?" Caleb didn't answer. His fingers found the bundle of letters in his coat pocket, 17 of them tied together with leather cord. 17 letters from Miss Clara Whitmore of Boston, Massachusetts. 17 letters that had slowly, impossibly made him believe that maybe, just maybe, he deserved a second chance at living. The train shuddered to a stop. Steam hissed. Caleb's mouth went dry. A conductor in a dark blue uniform stepped down and placed a wooden step beneath the passenger car door. He turned, offered his hand to someone inside. And then everything Caleb thought he knew shattered into 1,000 pieces. The conductor didn't help a woman step down from that train. He lifted her. He carried her in his arms like she weighed nothing at all, then set her gently into a wooden wheelchair that another passenger was unfolding on the platform. A wheelchair with large wheels and a woven cane seat, the kind Caleb had seen in hospital wards during the war. The kind that meant one thing and one thing only. She couldn't walk. For a long, terrible moment, Caleb couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. He just stood there, frozen as surely as the ground beneath his boots, staring at the woman who was now arranging her skirts over her useless legs, her hands trembling, her face pale as the snow that dusted the platform. She was beautiful. That was the cruel joke of it. Even from 30 feet away, he could see that she was beautiful, honey blonde hair, pinned beneath a blue bonnet. Delicate features, eyes the color of amber that caught the weak winter sunlight. She wore a traveling dress of dark blue wool and a coat that was far too thin for Wyoming winter. And she was searching the platform with those amber eyes, looking for him, looking for the man who had promised her a home and a future and a life, looking for the man she had lied to. Their eyes met. Caleb saw the exact moment she recognized him, saw hope flare in her face, bright and desperate, saw it die just as quickly when she registered his expression. He walked toward her. His legs moved without his permission, carrying him across that frozen platform step by heavy step. Behind him, he heard old Pete suck in a breath, heard the conductor mutter something under his breath. But Caleb kept walking until he stood directly in front of her wheelchair, close enough to see the tears gathering in her golden eyes. "Mr. Thornton," her voice was barely a whisper, "I can explain. Can you?" The words came out harder than he intended, rough and raw. He watched her flinch like he'd struck her, and something in his chest twisted painfully. "I didn't." She stopped, swallowed, started again. "I should have told you. In the letters, I know I should have told you." "Yeah." Caleb's jaw clenched so tight it ached. You should have. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. The wind picked up driving snow across the platform, and Clara shivered in her too thin coat. She gripped the arms of her wheelchair with white-knuckled hands. "I'll get back on the train," she said, and her voice was steady now, controlled, like she'd been preparing for this moment the entire 2,000-mile journey. "I have enough money for a return ticket. I'll go back to Boston. You'll never have to see me again." She meant it. Caleb could see that she meant every word. This wasn't a manipulation or a ploy. This was a woman who had gambled everything on a desperate hope and lost. "Why?" The word tore out of him before he could stop it. "Why didn't you tell me?" Clara's hands tightened on the wheelchair arms. For a moment she didn't answer. Then she lifted her chin, that stubborn, defiant gesture he would come to know so well, and met his eyes directly. "Because every other man ran when they found out. My fiancé, my father's business partners, every single one of them looked at this chair and saw a burden, a problem, a broken thing to be hidden away." Her voice cracked, but she pushed on. "I thought if you could just meet me first, if you could see me before you saw this, maybe you'd give me a chance. That's not... It was wrong." She cut him off, her words coming faster now. "I know it was wrong. I lied to you, and you have every right to be angry, every right to send me away. But I am not sorry for trying. I am not sorry for wanting a life that's more than being locked in my father's house like a shameful secret. I'm only sorry I wasn't brave enough to tell you the truth." Caleb stared at her. This small, fierce woman in her inadequate coat, sitting in a wheelchair on a frozen platform in the middle of nowhere, telling him she wasn't sorry for fighting for a chance at life. Something shifted in his chest. Something cracked. "The carriage accident," he said slowly. "You mentioned it in one of your letters. Said you'd been injured." "Yes." "You just didn't mention you couldn't walk." "No." Clara's voice was barely audible. "I didn't." Behind them, the train whistle blew a warning. The conductor was calling for final boarding. In a few minutes that train would pull away, and Clara Whitmore would be on it, heading back to a life she'd been desperate enough to flee across a continent to escape. Or she wouldn't. Caleb thought about his ranch 20 miles from here, about the cabin he'd built with his own hands, solid and warm, but empty. So goddamn empty. He thought about the letters in his pocket, 17 of them, filled with Clara's sharp wit and quiet courage and fierce determination to build something better than what she'd been given. He thought about his brother bleeding out in the Georgia mud, whispering with his last breath, "Live, Cal. Promise me you'll live." And he thought about the woman in front of him who had lied to him, yes, but who had also traveled 2,000 miles on nothing but hope. Knowing full well, this exact moment might come. Caleb dropped to his knees. The platform was freezing, the cold seeping immediately through his worn trousers. He heard Clara gasp, saw her hands fly to her mouth. He didn't care about any of it. He just knelt there in front of her wheelchair, bringing himself to her eye level, and he looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. "My brother died in my arms," he said, and his voice came out rough as gravel. "In the war. He was 22 years old, and I couldn't save him. I've spent 7 years running from that, punishing myself, convincing myself I don't deserve anything good, because I lived, and he didn't." Clara's tears were falling freely now, tracking silver lines down her pale cheeks. She didn't try to wipe them away. "So here's the thing, Miss Whitmore." Caleb reached out and took one of her cold hands in his, feeling her fingers tremble against his calloused palm. "I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can be what you need, but I spent 17 letters falling for a woman who was brave and funny and stubborn as hell, and I don't see how her being in a chair changes any of that." "Caleb." "The ranch is rough. The cabin's small. The winters are brutal, and the nearest neighbor's 15 miles away. I can't promise you an easy life." He tightened his grip on her hand. "But I can promise you this, I will never, ever lock you away like a shameful secret. Not as long as I'm breathing." Clara was shaking now, her whole body trembling with something that might have been cold or shock or overwhelming emotion. She opened her mouth closed. It opened it again. "Why?" she finally managed. "After what I did. After I lied to you. Why would you?" "Because I've been dead for 7 years," Caleb said simply. "And your letters made me feel alive again. Because right now looking at you I see someone who fought like hell to survive same as me. And maybe—" His voice cracked and he had to clear his throat before continuing. "Maybe two broken people can figure out how to be whole together." The train whistle blew again, more insistent now. Last call. Clara looked at the train, then back at Caleb still kneeling before her on the frozen platform. Tears and snow were both falling on her face, and she was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "You're going to freeze," she said absurdly, and Caleb laughed, actually laughed, a rusty sound he barely recognized as his own. "Woman, I just poured my heart out on this platform, and you're worried about my knees. Someone has to be practical." But she was almost smiling now, a trembling thing that transformed her face. "Is that a yes?" Clara took a shaky breath. I don't know what kind of man you are, Caleb Thornton, but I'd like to find out." "Good enough for me." Caleb pushed to his feet, feeling the cold ache in his knees, not caring one bit. He looked around for her luggage, spotted a small trunk and a carpet bag that the conductor had left on the platform. "That everything?" "I didn't have much to bring." "You got yourself. That's enough." He loaded her things into the wagon he'd brought, then turned back to face the real challenge. Clara was watching him with those golden eyes, her expression guarded, now waiting to see what he would do. "I need to carry you to the wagon," he said. "That all right?" Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or gratitude that he'd asked, instead of just grabbing her. "Yes, that's all right." Caleb bent and lifted her from the wheelchair, feeling how slight she was beneath the layers of clothes, how she stiffened at first, and then slowly, carefully relaxed against his chest. She smelled like train smoke and lavender soap. "Put your arms around my neck," he said quietly. "I've got you." She did. Her arms were thin, but strong, holding on with a grip that spoke of determination rather than fear. Caleb carried her across the platform, down the steps, through the snow to where his wagon waited with 2 patient horses. He set her on the bench seat as gently as he could manage, then went back for the wheelchair. It was heavier than he'd expected, awkward and unwieldy, but he wrestled it into the wagon bed next to her trunk. When he climbed up onto the seat beside her, Clara was staring straight ahead, her jaw set, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "You should know something," she said without looking at him. "What's that?" "I'm not just going to sit around being useless. I don't care if I can't walk. I can cook and sew and keep accounts and do 100 other things. I won't be a burden to you, Caleb. I refuse." Caleb gathered up the reins, clicking his tongue to set the horses moving. "Never thought you would be." "I mean it. I won't let you treat me like I'm fragile." "Ma'am." He glanced at her sideways. "You traveled 2,000 miles alone in a wheelchair to marry a stranger. Pretty sure fragile ain't the word for you." Something in her posture eased just slightly. "All right then. All right." They rode in silence for a while, the wagon wheels crunching through the snow, the horse's breath pluming white in the frozen air. The land stretched out around them, vast and empty, and white mountains rising in the distance like jagged teeth against the gray sky. "It's so big," Clara said softly. "I knew it would be big, but—" "Takes some getting used to." Caleb pulled the wool blanket from behind the seat and handed it to her. "Put this over your lap. Cold's only going to get worse as we get higher." She took the blanket without argument, spreading it over her useless legs, with practiced efficiency. He noticed she didn't look at them, didn't acknowledge them beyond the practical necessity of keeping them warm. "Tell me about the ranch," she said. "Your letters described it, but I want to hear it in your voice." So he told her. About the cabin with its 2 rooms and stone fireplace. About the barn he'd built himself, still missing shingles on the north side. About the cattle, 33 head now after the early winter losses, and the chickens, and the 3 horses, and the milk cow with the bad temper. "Her name's Delilah," he said. "Meanest cow in Wyoming territory. But she gives good milk, so I tolerate her." Clara laughed, and the sound hit Caleb like sunshine after a long winter. Rich and warm and real. "You named your cow Delilah." "She earned it. Nearly took my hand off the first time I tried to milk her." "I like her already." Caleb found himself smiling. "Yeah, well, wait till she tries to kick you. See how you like her then." They talked more as they rode easier now, the awkwardness of the platform beginning to fade. Clara told him about Boston, about her father's shipping business, and her mother who had died when she was 12. About the accident 3 years ago, a carriage wheel that had broken on a cobblestone street, sending her tumbling into traffic. "The doctor said I might never walk again," she said, her voice matter of fact. "And they were right. I can feel my legs some. There's pain sometimes. But they don't work. They haven't worked since that day." "And your fiancé?" Clara's expression hardened. "Left me the day after the doctors gave their verdict. Said he couldn't be expected to marry a cripple." "He said that to your face." "He said a lot of things to my face." She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "My father wasn't much better. He wanted to send me to an institution. Said I was an embarrassment to the family." Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. "I ever meet your father, I might have to punch him." "Get in line." Clara's smile was bitter. "My aunt saved me. She let me stay with her, helped me learn how to manage things from the chair. When she died last year, she left me a small inheritance. That's what I used for the train ticket." "She sounds like a good woman. She was the only one who saw me as a person instead of a problem." Clara's voice cracked. "I miss her every day." Caleb didn't know what to say to that, so he did the only thing he could. He reached over and covered her clasped hands with one of his own. She didn't pull away. The trail climbed higher as they rode, and the wind picked up, cutting through their coats like icy knives. Clara was shivering despite the blanket, her thin eastern clothes no match for Wyoming winter. "We need to stop," Caleb said. "Get you warmed up." "I'm fine." "No, you're not. You're shaking like a leaf, and we've still got an hour to go." He guided the horses toward a stand of pine trees that offered some shelter from the wind. "I've got coffee in a flask. It'll help." He pulled the wagon into the lee of the trees and jumped down, then came around to Clara's side. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. "What?" he asked. "You keep surprising me." "How so?" "I expected." She hesitated. "I don't know what I expected. Anger, certainly. Rejection, probably. But not this. Not kindness." Caleb reached behind the seat and found the flask of coffee he'd filled that morning still warm, thanks to the thick wool wrapping. He poured some into the cup that served as a lid and handed it to her. "Drink this." She took it, wrapping her cold fingers around the warm tin. "You didn't answer my question." "Wasn't a question." He poured himself some coffee and leaned against the wagon wheel. "But here's the thing, Clara. I spent 4 years in a war watching men do terrible things to each other. I've seen enough cruelty to last 10 lifetimes. What I haven't seen enough of is people being decent to each other. So, yeah, maybe I'm surprised you lied to me, but I'm more interested in why you felt like you had to." Clara was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee. "Because I was scared," she finally said. "Because I've had 5 years of being treated like I'm worthless, and I was desperate enough to gamble everything on a stranger's advertisement in a newspaper. And now—" She looked up at him, her amber eyes bright with something that might have been hope. "Now I'm still scared, but I'm also grateful that you're giving me a chance." "We're giving each other a chance," Caleb corrected. "I'm no prize, Clara. I've got scars you can't see, nightmares that wake me up screaming, and a temper I have to fight to control. You might decide I'm too damaged to be worth the trouble." Then we'll be two damaged people trying to figure out how to live." She managed a small smile. "Seems fair to me." Caleb looked at this woman, this brave, stubborn, complicated woman who had traveled across a continent to marry him, and felt something stir in his chest, something that might have been hope. "We should get moving," he said gruffly, pushing away from the wagon. "Still got a ways to go, and the light's fading." The rest of the journey passed in a kind of comfortable silence, broken occasionally by Clara's questions about the land, or the cattle, or the neighbors she might eventually meet. She was curious about everything, her sharp mind evident in the questions she asked. By the time they crested the final ridge and the valley spread out below them, the sun was beginning to set, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. "That's it," Caleb said, pointing to the cabin nestled against the hillside. "That's home." Clara leaned forward, her eyes taking in everything: the cabin with smoke rising from its chimney, the barn with its unfinished roof, the corral where the horses and cow stood huddled against the cold. It was rough and small, and nothing like the grand houses of Boston. But when she turned to look at Caleb, her eyes were shining. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Clara, it's barely finished. The barn needs work, and the cabin only has 2 rooms, and—" "It's perfect," she repeated, and there was fierce determination in her voice. "Because it's not Boston. Because no one here is going to lock me in a room and pretend I don't exist. Because for the first time in 3 years, I get to decide what my life looks like." She reached over and touched his arm just briefly. "Thank you, Caleb, for not putting me back on that train." Caleb swallowed hard against the sudden tightness in his throat. "Thank me after you've survived your first Montana blizzard," he managed. They descended into the valley as the last of the sunlight faded, and by the time Caleb pulled the wagon up to the cabin door, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Snow was beginning to fall again, light and gentle, dusting everything in fresh white. Getting Clara into the cabin proved to be a challenge. The wheelchair wouldn't fit through the door, and the threshold was too high for her to simply roll over it. "I can carry you in," Caleb offered. "I know." Clara bit her lip. "But I need to figure out how to manage. If you carry me everywhere, I'll never learn to do things myself." "Fair enough. What do you need?" She studied the doorway for a moment. "Can you lift the front of the chair while I push on the wheels just enough to get over the threshold?" They tried it. It was awkward and clumsy, but it worked. The wheelchair lurched over the raised threshold and into the cabin. "Ha!" Clara's face lit up with triumph. "We did it!" "We did it." Caleb agreed, and he was smiling too. He built up the fire while Clara rolled herself around the cabin, examining everything. He watched her take in the simple furniture, the cast-iron stove, the shelves lined with provisions. Watched her navigate carefully around the table, testing whether there was room for her wheelchair. "We'll need to move some things," she said, more to herself than to him. "Make wider paths. But it's manageable." "I can build a ramp for the door," Caleb offered, "and lower some of the shelves so you can reach them." She turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "You do that? You said you didn't want to be treated as fragile. Way I see it, making the house easier for you to navigate isn't treating you as fragile. It's just practical." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, a real smile, wide and warm, that transformed her entire face. "Caleb Thornton," she said, "I think we might actually make this work." "Yeah." He found himself smiling back, something unfamiliar blooming in his chest. "I think we might." Outside, the snow was falling harder now, and the wind was beginning to pick up. By morning, there would be a fresh blanket of white covering the valley, burying the tracks of their wagons, sealing them into this cabin together. 3 days until Christmas. A man who'd stopped believing in miracles. A woman who'd gambled everything on a desperate hope. And somewhere in the space between them, something was beginning to grow. That first night, Caleb insisted on sleeping on the floor by the stove. "The bed's yours," he said, spreading out his bedroll with practiced efficiency. "I've slept on worse." Clara watched him from her wheelchair, her hands folded in her lap. Caleb, that's ridiculous. You'll freeze down there. I'll be fine. You'll be miserable. Been miserable before. He didn't look at her. Survived it. Clara wheeled herself closer, the chair's wooden wheels creaking on the packed earth floor. Is this about propriety? Because we're going to be married and... It's about respect. Caleb finally met her eyes. You don't know me yet. Not really. And I don't know you. Seems right to give us both some time to figure this out before we share a bed. Something in Clara's chest loosened. All those years with her fiancé, with his casual assumptions about what she owed him, what she should be grateful for. And here was this rough cowboy sleeping on a cold floor because he wanted her to feel safe. All right, she said softly. But tomorrow, we're going to figure out a better arrangement. I won't have you breaking your back on my account. Yes, ma'am. She couldn't tell if he was mocking her or not. But when she looked at his face, she saw the ghost of a smile. Getting into the bed proved to be its own challenge. Clara had developed techniques over the years, ways to transfer herself from chair to surface without help. But this bed was different. Higher than she was used to, the mattress softer, the quilts heavier. Caleb watched her struggle for exactly 3 seconds before stepping forward. Let me help. I can do it. I know you can, but you don't have to. Clara's hands stilled on the wheelchair arms. She looked up at him, standing there in the firelight, his face carefully neutral, but his eyes watchful. This is hard for me, she admitted. Accepting help. Figured that out already. I spent 3 years being told I was helpless. I refuse to believe it. There's a difference between being helpless and accepting help. Caleb crouched down so they were at eye level. You're not helpless, Clara. Anyone can see that. But you're also in a new place with furniture that doesn't fit you in weather that's trying to kill us both. Accepting help right now isn't weakness. It's just practical. She stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. All right. What do you need me to do? He helped her transfer from the wheelchair to the bed with surprising gentleness, his calloused hands careful and sure. When she was settled under the quilts, he stepped back immediately, giving her space. Warm enough. Yes. Clara pulled the quilts up to her chin, suddenly aware of how strange this was, lying in a stranger's bed, in a stranger's cabin, at the edge of the known world. Caleb. He was already walking back toward his bedroll. Yeah. Thank you, for all of it. He paused, his back to her. Get some sleep, Clara. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. She wanted to say more, wanted to ask him about the nightmares he'd mentioned, about the brother who'd died in his arms, about the 7 years of loneliness that had driven him to place that advertisement. But exhaustion was pulling at her, the journey finally catching up, and before she could form the words, she was asleep. Clara woke to silence. Not the silence of Boston, which was never truly silent. There was always the rumble of carriages, the shouts of street vendors, the constant hum of a city that never fully slept. This was different. This was absolute stillness, the kind of silence that pressed against your ears and made you strain to hear something, anything. She pushed herself upright, her arms trembling with the effort, and looked toward the window. Gray light filtered through the shutters, but it was dim, muted. Wrong somehow. Storm's getting worse. Clara's head snapped toward the voice. Caleb was crouched by the stove, building up the fire, his face lit by the growing flames. What time is it? Past dawn. Can't really tell more than that. He stood wiping his hands on his trousers. Snow's piled up against the cabin. We're snowed in. The words should have terrified her. Trapped. Isolated. Dependent on a man she barely knew. But somehow, looking at Caleb's calm face, Clara felt only a strange sense of relief. What do we need to do? He looked at her, then really looked, and she saw surprise flicker across his features. You're not scared. Should I be? Most people would be. Being trapped like this? Clara considered the question. I spent 3 years trapped in my father's house. At least here I'm trapped with someone who sees me as a person instead of a problem." She pushed the quilts aside. "Now tell me what needs doing." A slow smile spread across Caleb's face, the first real smile she'd seen from him, unguarded and warm. It transformed him, made him look younger, made her heart do something strange in her chest. "Bossy, aren't you? I prefer practical. Now help me into my chair." He did, and then they got to work. The cabin, Clara quickly discovered, was surprisingly well organized despite its roughness. Caleb showed her where everything was, the provisions in the corner, the water bucket that needed refilling, the coffee pot, and the cast iron pans. He moved around the small space with the ease of long practice, and Clara watched carefully, memorizing the patterns. "I'll need to check the animals," he said as they ate a simple breakfast of coffee and dried meat. "Barn's not far, but in this weather it might as well be a mile. I've got a rope line strung up between here and there for days like this. I want to come with you." Caleb's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "Clara, I know I can't help much, but I need to learn how things work here, and sitting in this cabin while you're out there in danger." She shook her head. "I can't do that. I won't. The snow's deep. Your chair. So carry me, or drag me on a sled. I don't care how we do it, Caleb, but I am not going to be the kind of wife who sits safely inside while her husband risks his life." He stared at her for a long moment, then he set down his fork and leaned back in his chair. "You know what I believe you." "Good, because I mean it." "I know you do, that's the problem." He ran a hand through his dark hair. "All right, look, I can carry you to the barn, but it's going to be rough. Cold, like you've never felt wind that'll cut through anything. You sure you want to do this?" "I'm sure." "Then we bundle up, every piece of warm clothing we've got, and you do exactly what I say out there, understand? No arguments, no stubbornness. The cold can kill you in minutes if you're not careful." "I understand." Caleb studied her face for another moment, then nodded. "All right then, let's get you dressed." The process of bundling Clara for the trip to the barn took nearly 20 minutes. Caleb layered her in wool and leather wrapping scarves around her face, until only her eyes showed, tucking blankets around her legs, even though she couldn't feel the cold there. "My legs won't get frostbite," Clara said at one point. "I can't feel them anyway." Caleb's hands stilled on the blanket he was tucking. "That's not—" He stopped, something shifting in his expression. "I don't want to take any chances." "Caleb." "What?" "It's all right to talk about it. My legs, I mean. I'm not going to break if you acknowledge that they don't work." He was quiet for a moment, his hands still resting on the blanket. "I saw a lot of men lose legs in the war," he finally said. "Saw what it did to them. The ones who survived the surgery anyway. Is that why you didn't send me back, because you'd seen it before?" "Partly." He finished tucking the blanket and looked up at her. "But mostly because of your letters. The way you wrote the things you said. I already knew who you were before you got here. The chair doesn't change that." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. Now was not the time. "Ready?" Caleb asked. "Ready." He lifted her from the wheelchair, easier now, both of them learning each other's rhythms, and carried her to the door. When he opened it, the wind hit them like a physical blow, driving snow into the cabin. "Hold on to me!" Caleb shouted over the howl of the storm. "Don't let go for anything." Clara wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed her face against his chest. His heart was pounding against her cheek, strong and steady, and she focused on that as he stepped out into the white chaos. The journey to the barn was a nightmare. She couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything except the roar of the wind and Caleb's labored breathing. The cold seared her exposed skin, found every gap in her layers, tried to worm its way into her bones. She felt Caleb stumble once, twice, and tightened her grip around his neck. Then they were through a door, and the wind cut off abruptly, and Clara gasped in the sudden relative quiet. "We made it," Caleb said, his voice rough. He set her down on a hay bale, and she looked around at the dim interior of the barn. Horses stamped and whickered in their stalls. A cow lowed plaintively. Chickens clucked from somewhere in the shadows. "The animals?" Clara said. "Are they all right?" "Let me check." Caleb moved through the barn with efficient purpose, checking water buckets, distributing hay, examining each animal with practiced eyes. Clara watched him work, noting how he spoke softly to the horses, how he scratched the cow behind her ears despite her bad temper. "Everything looks good," he said, finally returning to her. "Water's frozen, but I can break through it. They've got enough hay to last a few days." "What about the cattle? The ones in the valley?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "Nothing I can do for them right now. They'll either find shelter and survive or—" He didn't finish the sentence. "How many could you lose? In a storm like this, could be half the herd. Could be all of them." His voice was flat, but she could see the fear beneath it. Those cattle represented everything he'd worked for, everything he was trying to build. "I'm sorry." "Nothing to be sorry for. It's the life out here. You take what the land gives you, and you survive what it throws at you." He squared his shoulders. "Come on. I'll show you the chickens." The chickens were huddled together in a corner of the barn, fluffed up against the cold. Clara counted 6 hens and 1 rooster, all of them eyeing her suspiciously. "That big one there is Matilda," Caleb said, pointing to a particularly plump hen. "She's the boss. Don't let her fool you. She looks soft, but she's meaner than a rattlesnake when she wants to be." Clara laughed, despite herself. "You really named your chicken Matilda?" "She earned it." Caleb's mouth quirked. "First week I had her, she flew at my face when I tried to collect eggs. Drew blood and everything." "And you kept her?" "Best layer I've got." He shrugged. "Sometimes the mean ones are the most valuable." They spent an hour in the barn, Caleb showing Clara everything: how to feed the chickens, how to check for eggs, how to read the signs of illness in the animals. She absorbed it all, asking questions, watching carefully. When he finally carried her back to the cabin, fighting through the still raging storm, she felt exhausted but strangely exhilarated. "You did good out there," Caleb said as he set her back in her wheelchair. They were both covered in snow, shaking with cold, but Clara was grinning. "I collected 3 eggs." "I saw." "Without getting pecked." "Matilda must like you." He was smiling now too, that rare, unguarded smile that made her heart skip. "Most people, she goes for the eyes." They warmed up by the stove, drinking hot coffee and eating the simple lunch Clara had insisted on preparing before they went out. Her arms ached from supporting herself from the unfamiliar effort of navigating in the cold, but it was a good ache, a productive ache. "Tell me about the war," she said suddenly. Caleb's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. "What?" "The war. You said your brother died. You said you have nightmares." Clara met his eyes steadily. "We're going to be married, Caleb. I want to know you. All of you, not just the parts you think are safe to show." For a long moment he didn't answer. He set down his coffee cup, stared at his hands, and Clara could see the struggle playing out across his face. "It's ugly," he finally said. "What I've got in my head. It's not something you need to carry. Maybe I want to carry it. Maybe that's what marriage is, sharing the weight, so neither of us has to bear it alone." Caleb looked at her, then really looked, and she saw something shift in his pale green eyes. Something opening just a crack. "His name was Thomas," he said quietly. "Tommy, we called him. He was 2 years younger than me, and he followed me everywhere. When I enlisted, he enlisted. Said he couldn't let his big brother go off to war alone." Clara stayed silent, sensing that any words would break the fragile thread of his confession. "We were at Chickamauga, September of '63. The fighting was—" He shook his head. "I don't have words for what it was. Hell doesn't cover it. Tommy got hit in the 3rd charge. Mini a ball to the gut. I carried him behind our lines, but there was nothing anyone could do. He died in my arms, asking me to tell our mother he was brave." "Was he brave?" "He was terrified. We all were. But he kept fighting anyway. That's all bravery is when you get down to it. Being scared out of your mind and doing the thing anyway. Like you did today, Clara said softly. Going out in that storm. Caleb shook his head. That's not bravery. That's just necessity. Maybe they're the same thing. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers closing around her smaller ones. I haven't talked about Tommy in 7 years, he said. Not to anyone. Why me? Why now? Because you asked. He looked at their joined hands. Because you're the first person who's asked like they actually wanted to know the answer. Clara squeezed his fingers. I want to know all of it, Caleb, the good and the bad, the dreams and the nightmares. That's what I came here for, not just a roof over my head, but a real partnership. Someone to share a life with. Even if that life is hard. Even if I wake up screaming some nights. Especially then. She lifted her chin, that stubborn gesture he was learning to recognize. I've spent 3 years being told I'm not enough, not whole enough, not useful enough, not worth enough. And I'm done with that. I'm done being the broken one, the one who needs saving. I want to be the one doing the saving sometimes. You already are, Caleb said, and his voice was rough. You just don't know it yet. The storm raged for 2 more days. They fell into a rhythm, these two broken people learning to be whole together. Mornings were for tending the animals, Caleb carrying Clara to the barn and back, teaching her more each time. Afternoons were for cabin work, for planning for the endless small tasks of survival. Evenings were for talking, for stories, for getting to know each other in ways that letters never could. Clara discovered that Caleb could play the harmonica, though he was shy about it at first. She persuaded him to play on the second evening, and the mournful notes filled the cabin with something that felt almost like home. My brother taught me, he said when he finished. Used to drive our mother crazy, the two of us playing together. Will you teach me? He looked surprised. You want to learn? I want to learn everything, every part of this life. She smiled. Besides, someone has to drive you crazy now that Tommy's gone. He laughed at that, a real laugh that lit up his whole face. You're something else, Clara Whitmore. Clara Thornton, she corrected. Soon, anyway. Clara Thornton, he repeated, and the way he said it made something warm bloom in her chest. On the morning of the 3rd day, Clara woke to find Caleb standing by the window, his body rigid with tension. What is it? Storm's breaking. He didn't turn around. I need to check on the cattle. Clara pushed herself up. I'm coming with you. Clara. I know I can't ride. I know I'll slow you down. But I can't stay here alone not knowing if you're safe. I can't. He turned then, and she saw the fear in his eyes. Not fear of the weather or the cattle, but fear of something else. Fear of losing something he'd only just found. If something happens to me out there, nothing's going to happen to you. I won't allow it. Despite everything, he smiled. Bossy. Practical. She met his eyes. Take me to the Morrison place. You said they're 15 miles south. I can stay there while you check the herd. He considered this. Mary would be glad for the company. Then it settled. Help me get dressed. The journey to the Morrison ranch was brutal. Caleb rigged a small sled behind one of the horses, bundling Clara into it with every blanket they owned. The cold was beyond anything she'd ever experienced, a living thing that tried to consume her with every gust of wind. But she survived it. And when Mary Morrison opened her door to find Caleb Thornton on her porch with a woman in a wheelchair, her face transformed from shock to delight. You got yourself a bride. Mary yanked Clara's sled right into her house, barely giving Caleb time to help transfer her to the wheelchair. Get inside, both of you. You look half frozen. Jake, get out here. What followed was a blur of warmth and welcome and questions. Mary Morrison was small and blonde with sharp blue eyes and a personality that filled every room she entered. Her husband, Jake, was a big man with an easy smile and hands that were gentle despite their size. "I'll go with you," Jake told Caleb. "Check on your herd. 2 men are better than 1 in weather like this." "I appreciate that. It's what neighbors do." Jake clapped Caleb on the shoulder. "Besides, Mary's been complaining about not having another woman to talk to. This'll keep her happy for weeks." Mary was already settling Clara by the fire, pressing a cup of hot tea into her hands. "You'll tell me everything," she said firmly. "How you met, how you got here, all of it. I want every detail." Clara looked at Caleb standing awkwardly by the door, clearly torn between staying with her and going to save his cattle. "Go," she said. "I'll be fine here." Clara. "Go check on your cattle, Caleb. They need you. I'll be right here when you get back." He crossed the room in 3 long strides and kissed her. Right there in front of the Morrisons, without hesitation or embarrassment. It was quick and fierce, and when he pulled back, his eyes were bright. "I'll be back before dark," he said. "You'd better be." Then he was gone, Jake following, and Clara was left alone with Mary Morrison, and 1,000 questions she wasn't sure how to answer. "Well," Mary said, settling into the chair across from her. "You'd better start talking, Mrs. Almost Thornton, because I have been dying for some good conversation." So Clara talked. She told Mary about Boston, about the accident, about the fiancé who had abandoned her. She told her about the advertisement, about the letters, about arriving at the station in her wheelchair and watching Caleb's face as he realized the truth. "He dropped to his knees," Clara said quietly, "right there on the platform, and instead of sending me away, he told me about his brother." Mary's eyes were soft. "That sounds like Caleb. He acts tough, but there's a good heart under all that armor." "Did you know him before, when he first came here?" "We were here first, Jake and me. Watched Caleb claim his land, build his cabin, struggle through those first winters alone." Mary shook her head. "Jake tried to get him to come for dinner for holidays, but he always refused, said he was fine on his own." "He wasn't fine." "No. He was dying of loneliness, same as his ranch was dying of neglect. One man can't do it all no matter how stubborn he is." Mary leaned forward. "But these past few months since he started getting your letters, something changed. He started accepting help, started coming to town more often, started talking about the future like he actually expected to have one." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. "He says my letters made him feel alive again." "They did more than that. They gave him hope." Mary reached over and squeezed her hand. "You saved him, Clara. Whether you know it or not, you saved him." "He saved me too." "Then you're even. That's how the best marriages work." The hours passed slowly. Mary kept Clara occupied with tea and conversation and stories about life on the frontier. But as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Clara found herself watching the door more and more. "They'll be back," Mary said, following her gaze. "Jake knows this land like the back of his hand. He won't let anything happen to your Caleb." "I know. You love him." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to deny it. It was too soon, too fast. They'd only known each other for 3 days, but the words wouldn't come. Because Mary was right. Somewhere between the platform and the cabin, between the blizzard and the barn, between his confession about Tommy and hers about her fiancée Clara Whitmore had fallen in love with Caleb Thornton. "Oh," she said softly. Mary smiled. "Yeah. That's usually how it happens out here. No time for games, no room for pretense. You either love someone or you don't, and when you do, you know it." "But it's only been 3 days." "I knew I loved Jake after 3 hours." Mary's smile turned reminiscent. "He showed up at my father's farm in Illinois looking for work. Took one look at me and forgot how to speak. 3 hours later I was picking out wedding colors. And you've been happy all these years. I've been married. That's not the same thing." Mary's eyes were honest, clear. "We've fought, we've struggled, we've lost children and livestock and hope. But we've done it together, and that's what matters, not the happiness, but the together. Clara was still thinking about that when the door burst open and Caleb stumbled through, Jake close behind. Both men were covered in snow, exhausted, but Caleb's eyes went immediately to Clara. "You're still here," he said, as if he'd half expected her to vanish. "Where else would I go?" He crossed the room and dropped to his knees beside her wheelchair. That gesture she was learning meant he was meeting her where she was, meant he saw her as an equal. "We found them," he said. "The cattle. They'd sheltered in a grove of pines. Lost 7 head, but the rest made it." 7. Clara's heart sank. "Caleb, I'm so sorry." Could have been worse. Could have been all of them. He took her hands in his cold fingers closing around her warm ones. "Clara, there's something I need to ask you." "What is it?" "Tomorrow's Christmas Eve. And I know we said we'd take our time, get to know each other better, but—" He stopped, took a breath. "I don't want to wait anymore. I don't want to waste any more time. Jake here, he's a lay minister. He can marry us proper, if you want, if you're ready." Clara stared at him. Behind her she heard Mary gasp, heard Jake chuckle softly. But all she could see was Caleb kneeling before her with hope and fear warring in his pale green eyes. "You want to marry me?" she said slowly. "Tomorrow, on Christmas Eve." "I want to marry you today if Jake would do it. But Mary would kill me if I robbed her of a chance to throw a proper wedding." "You're damn right I would," Mary muttered. Clara felt a laugh bubbling up in her chest, wild and joyful, and completely unexpected. "You're asking me to marry you, really marry you, knowing everything you know about me?" "I'm asking you to be my wife." Caleb's grip on her hands tightened. "I'm asking you to build a life with me. To wake up next to me and go to sleep beside me, and face whatever comes between together. I'm asking you to let me love you, Clara, if you'll have me." She was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling too, smiling so hard her cheeks ached. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes. Yes, Caleb Thornton, I'll marry you. Tomorrow, Christmas Eve, whenever you want." "Yes." He surged up and kissed her, and somewhere behind them, Mary was cheering and Jake was laughing, but none of it mattered. Nothing mattered, except this Caleb's lips on hers, his hands cupping her face, the promise of a future they would build together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb pressed his forehead against hers. "Merry Christmas, Clara," he said. "Merry Christmas, Caleb." And for the first time in 3 years, Clara Whitmore believed in miracles again. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the storm finally broken, and Mary Morrison took charge of everything with the efficiency of a general commanding troops. "You," she said, pointing at Caleb, "are not allowed to see your bride until the ceremony. Jake, take him to the barn. Find him something decent to wear. And for heaven's sake, make him shave." "Mary," Caleb started. "Out. Now. I have work to do." Jake laughed and clapped Caleb on the shoulder. "Best not to argue, son. I learned that lesson early." Caleb shot Clara a helpless look, but she just smiled and waved him away. "Go. I'll be fine." When the men were gone, Mary turned to Clara with a gleam in her eye. "Now, let's make you a bride." What followed was a whirlwind of activity that left Clara breathless. Mary produced a dress from somewhere cream-colored wool, with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs, clearly her own wedding dress, carefully preserved over the years. "It won't fit perfectly," Mary admitted, holding it up against Clara. "You're smaller than I was, but we can make adjustments." "Mary, I can't wear your wedding dress." "Nonsense. It's just been sitting in a trunk for 15 years. About time it got some use." Mary's eyes softened. "Every woman deserves to feel beautiful on her wedding day, Clara, even especially out here in the middle of nowhere." Clara's throat tightened. "I don't know how to thank you." "You can thank me by being happy, and by making that stubborn cowboy of yours happy too." Mary smiled. Now hold still while I pin this." The alterations took most of the morning. Mary worked with quick, skilled hands, and Clara helped where she could, her own sewing experience proving useful. By midday, the dress fit well enough, and Mary had styled Clara's honey blonde hair into an elegant twist secured with pins borrowed from her own collection. "You look beautiful," Mary said softly, stepping back to admire her work. Clara looked down at herself, at the cream dress that made her skin glow, at her useless legs, hidden beneath the flowing skirt, at her hands folded in her lap. "I look like a bride," she said, wonder in her voice. "You are a bride, and Caleb Thornton is the luckiest man in Wyoming territory." The ceremony was simple. They gathered in the Morrisons' main room, cleared of furniture to make space. Jake stood before the fireplace in his best shirt, a worn Bible in his hands. Mary's two daughters, small girls with their mother's sharp eyes, served as witnesses, clutching wildflowers Mary had somehow preserved from the summer. And then the door opened, and Caleb walked in. He'd cleaned up. Shaved like Mary had demanded, revealing the strong line of his jaw and the small scar on his chin. His dark hair was combed back, still damp. He wore a clean white shirt and dark trousers, and someone, probably Jake, had polished his boots until they shone. But it was his eyes that caught Clara's breath. Those pale green eyes fixed on her like she was the only thing in the world worth seeing. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and dropped to his knees beside her wheelchair. That gesture again, that beautiful gesture that said, "I see you, I meet you where you are, we are equals." "You're beautiful," he said, his voice rough. "So are you." He laughed at that, a surprised sound. "Pretty sure men aren't supposed to be beautiful." "Then we're both breaking rules today." Jake cleared his throat. "If you two are done, we've got a wedding to perform." They were done, and they weren't done at all. They would never be done with each other, Clara realized. This was just the beginning. "Dearly beloved," Jake began, his deep voice filling the room, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The words washed over Clara like warm water. She heard them without really hearing them, too focused on Caleb's face, on his hands holding hers, on the steady beat of her own heart. "Do you, Caleb James Thornton, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do." No hesitation, no doubt. Just 2 simple words that changed everything. "And do you, Clara Elizabeth Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Clara looked at Caleb, at this man who had knelt before her on a frozen platform, who had carried her through blizzards, who had looked at her wheelchair and seen not a burden, but a partner. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Jake smiled. "Caleb, you may kiss your bride." Caleb cupped her face in his calloused hands and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Behind them, Mary was crying openly, and the little girls were giggling, but Clara barely noticed. There was only Caleb, only this moment, only the beginning of the rest of their lives. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb pressed his forehead against hers. "Hello, Mrs. Thornton." "Hello, Mr. Thornton." They rode back to their ranch that afternoon, Mary and Jake insisting they take food and supplies for the holiday. The journey was easier this time. The snow had settled, the sun was shining, and Clara was no longer a stranger, being carried into the unknown. She was a wife going home. Home. The word felt different now. Real. Caleb had rigged up a better sled for her, one with sides and a cushioned seat, and he pulled it behind his horse while leading Clara's borrowed mare. She watched his back as they traveled, watched the way he moved in the saddle, watched the way he kept glancing back to make sure she was still there. "You don't have to keep checking," she called out. "I'm not going anywhere." He slowed until they were riding side by side. "Old habit, making sure the important things don't disappear." Am I an important thing now? You're the most important thing. He said it simply without embarrassment. You're my wife. Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest despite the cold air. I like the sound of that. So do I. They reached the cabin as the sun was beginning to set, painting the snow in shades of orange and pink. Caleb helped Clara transfer from the sled to her wheelchair, and together they made their way inside. The cabin felt different too. The pine boughs Caleb had put up before the storm still decorated the walls, their scent filling the air. The white candle stood ready on the table. Everything was exactly as they'd left it, and yet everything had changed. I have something for you, Caleb said, moving to the dresser. He pulled out a small cloth bundle and handed it to her. It's not much. I meant to give it to you on Christmas, but, well, seems fitting to give it now. Clara unwrapped the cloth carefully. Inside was a wooden box, small and beautifully made, the wood sanded smooth and polished until it glowed. You made this. Yeah. Worked on it before you came. Had to hide it during the storm. He shifted uncomfortably. Open it. Inside the box, nestled on a piece of soft fabric, was the deed to the ranch. Clara pulled it out with trembling hands and read the words written there. This says my name, she whispered. Clara Thornton. It says I own half the ranch. You do. Had Jake draw it up official last month when I knew you were coming. Caleb crouched beside her chair, meeting her eyes. I meant what I said in my letters, Clara. This isn't just my place anymore. It's ours. Half of everything legal and proper. But Caleb, I haven't done anything to earn. You came here. He took her hands in his. You traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger. You fought through a blizzard. You learned to tend chickens and survive storms and live in a way that's harder than anything you've ever known. You earned this by being here, by choosing this, by choosing me. Tears were streaming down Clara's face now. No one has ever given me anything like this. A home. A real home that's mine. Ours, he corrected gently. Ours. She pulled him close and kissed him, tasting salt from her tears, feeling his hands come up to cup her face with infinite tenderness. This was what she had traveled so far to find. This was what she had risked everything for. A partner. A home. A life. They celebrated Christmas Eve quietly, just the two of them. Caleb cooked venison steaks while Clara made coffee, and they ate at the small table by candlelight, talking about everything and nothing. The cabin was warm, the fire crackling in the stove, the world outside frozen and still. Tell me about the future, Clara said, reaching across the table to take his hand. What do you see when you look ahead? Caleb considered the question. A bigger herd, maybe 100 head in a few years. The barn finished proper with a real roof that doesn't leak. An addition on the cabin, a real bedroom, a parlor, maybe a porch where we can sit on summer evenings. What else? Children. He said the word carefully, watching her face. Someday. If you want them. I know it might be complicated. With my legs. Clara finished for him. Caleb, I can still have children. The accident didn't damage anything that way. The doctors were very clear about that. Something shifted in his expression. Hope, joy, relief, all tangled together. You'd want that children. I'd want everything with you. She squeezed his hand. But not yet. Right now, I just want to be with you. Learn this life. Become the partner you deserve. You already are. Not yet. But I will be. They went to bed together for the first time that night, husband and wife in truth as well as name. There was awkwardness, fumbling laughter at their own inexperience. But there was also tenderness and care, and a growing fire that Clara had never expected to feel again. Afterward, lying in Caleb's arms with his heartbeat steady under her cheek, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Merry Christmas, Clara. Caleb murmured against her hair. Merry Christmas, Caleb. And it was. It was the merriest Christmas either of them had ever known. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Clara learned the patterns of ranch life, the morning animal checks, the constant battle against cold and hunger, and the thousand small crises that frontier life threw at them. She adapted her wheelchair to the terrain, working with Caleb to build ramps and modify doorways. She took over the kitchen entirely, freeing Caleb for the heavier outdoor work. They fought sometimes small disagreements that flared and died quickly. Clara's stubbornness clashed with Caleb's protectiveness. Her need for independence warred with his instinct to help, but they always talked it through, always found their way back to each other. "You don't have to do everything yourself," Caleb said one afternoon after catching Clara trying to carry firewood from the pile to the stove. "I can't just sit here and be useless." "You're not useless. You're just—" "What crippled, helpless, unable to contribute?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "I was going to say resting. You pushed yourself too hard yesterday and Mary said—" "I don't care what Mary said. I'm not some delicate flower that needs protecting." "No one said you were." "Then stop treating me like one." They stared at each other, both breathing hard. Then Caleb ran a hand through his hair and sighed. "I'm trying to take care of you, Clara. That's what husbands do. And I'm trying to be a partner, not a patient. That's what wives do." She softened her voice. "I know you're scared. I know you've lost people, and you're afraid of losing me too. But you're not going to lose me by letting me work. You're going to lose me by smothering me." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed to her and crouched beside her chair. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I don't know how to love someone without trying to protect them from everything. Tommy." His voice cracked. "I couldn't protect Tommy. I couldn't save him. And ever since then, I've been trying to control everything to keep everyone safe, and you can't." Clara cupped his face in her hands. "You can't protect me from everything, Caleb. Bad things will happen. That's life. But we face them together as equals. That's what marriage is." "What if I mess it up? What if I can't? Then we'll fix it, together." He kissed her, then a desperate kiss full of fear and love, and the slow, terrifying process of learning to trust another person with your heart. "I love you," he said when they broke apart. "I should have said that before. I love you, Clara. I love you too." And she did. She loved him more than she'd ever thought possible. It was the last day of January when the wolves came. Caleb had ridden out at dawn to check on the cattle, leaving Clara at the cabin, with strict instructions to stay inside until he returned. But by midday, he still hadn't come back, and Clara's worry had grown into something that clawed at her chest. She wheeled herself to the window and looked out at the frozen landscape. Nothing moved. The world was still and white and empty. And then she heard it. Gunfire, distant but unmistakable. One shot, then another, then a terrible silence. Clara didn't think. She didn't weigh options or consider consequences. She just moved, wheeling herself to the door, grabbing Caleb's spare rifle from where it hung by the fireplace. She'd never fired a gun in her life, but she'd watched him load and clean it a dozen times. She knew the basics. That would have to be enough. Getting out of the cabin was a struggle, her wheelchair fighting against the snow. But Clara was beyond caring about difficulty. Caleb was out there somewhere. Caleb was in trouble. Nothing else mattered. She followed the trail his horse had left, pushing herself forward with shaking arms. The rifle balanced across her lap. The cold bit at her exposed skin, and her breath came in ragged gasps, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The howling started when she was halfway to the valley. Wolves, and not just one. A pack from the sound of it. Close. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She pushed harder, faster, the wheels of her chair catching on rocks and ice. And then she crested a small rise and saw them. Caleb was on the ground. His horse was nowhere to be seen, fled, or worse. He was crouched behind a fallen log, his rifle empty or jammed, and surrounding him were 6 wolves. gray shapes with hungry eyes circling, waiting for their moment. One of them lunged. Caleb swung the rifle like a club, catching it across the jaw, driving it back. But the others were closing in, sensing weakness. Clara didn't think. She raised the rifle, aimed at the largest wolf, and fired. The kick nearly knocked her out of her chair, but she clung to the armrests with grim determination. The wolf yelped and fell, and suddenly all 6 sets of eyes were on her. "Clara," Caleb's voice raw with fear, "get out of here." Instead, she reloaded. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the bullets, but she forced herself to focus, to remember what Caleb had shown her, to push the fear down and do what needed doing. She fired again, missed, fired a 3rd time and saw another wolf stumble. The pack was confused now, caught between 2 threats. Caleb used the distraction to draw his pistol. He must have been saving the bullets and fired twice. Another wolf went down. The remaining 3 fled, melting back into the tree line like gray ghosts. Clara sat there in her wheelchair, the rifle smoking in her lap, her whole body shaking with reaction. She watched Caleb push himself to his feet, watched him stagger toward her, watched his face twist with something she couldn't read. "Are you hurt?" Her voice came out as a croak. "Caleb, are you?" He reached her and fell to his knees in the snow, his arms going around her, his face pressing against her stomach. "You saved me," he said, his voice muffled against her coat. "You came out here and you saved me." "Of course I did. You're my husband." "I could have lost you. If they'd turned on you, if you'd missed." "But I didn't miss." Clara stroked his hair with trembling fingers. "I didn't miss, and you're alive, and we're going home now. Together." He looked up at her, his pale green eyes bright with tears. "I love you. God, Clara, I love you so much it scares me." "I know." She smiled, though tears were tracking down her own cheeks. "I love you too. Now get up, Cowboy. We've got work to do." It took them an hour to make it back to the cabin. Caleb's ankle was twisted, not broken, but bad enough that walking was agony. He leaned on the back of Clara's wheelchair, letting her guide them both through the snow, 2 broken people supporting each other. When they finally got inside, when the door was closed and the fire was built up, and they were wrapped in blankets by the stove, Clara felt something shift between them. Some final wall crumbling, some last barrier falling away. "I thought you were going to die," she whispered. "When I heard those gunshots and you didn't come back, I thought I was going to lose you. But you didn't just sit there and worry. You came after me." Caleb shook his head, something like awe in his expression. "You came out there in your wheelchair with a gun you'd never fired to face down a wolf pack. I told you, I won't be the kind of wife who sits safely inside while her husband is in danger. I should have listened." "Yes, you should have." He laughed at that, a broken sound that was half sob. "You're something else, Clara Thornton. You know that. So you keep telling me." They sat together in the growing warmth, and Caleb told her what had happened. How his horse had spooked at the first wolf throwing him, how he'd lost his rifle in the fall, how he'd been sure he was going to die out there in the snow. "And then I heard the gunshot," he said. "And I looked up, and there you were like some kind of avenging angel, and I thought, that's my wife. That's the woman I married." Avenging angel might be a stretch. Terrified woman with shaky aim is more accurate. Your aim was good enough. He pulled her closer. Your aim was perfect. That night they lay together in bed, both too exhausted and too relieved to sleep. Clara's head was on Caleb's chest, his heartbeat steady under her ear. "I saw Tommy," Caleb said suddenly. "When the wolves were closing in, I saw him the way he looked in that field in Georgia, blood on his uniform, reaching out to me." Clara didn't say anything, just held him tighter. "I thought he was coming to take me with him, and part of me was ready to go. I've been half in love with death for 7 years, Clara. Ever since he died, I've been waiting for my turn. But then I heard your voice, and I thought about you alone in that cabin, waiting for me to come home. And I realized, his voice cracked. I realized I don't want to die anymore. I want to live. I want to grow old with you. I want to see what we can build together. Clara pushed herself up so she could look at him. His face was raw and open, more vulnerable than she'd ever seen it. Then live, she said simply. Live with me. For me. For the children we'll have someday. For the ranch we're building. Live, Caleb. That's all I ask. I will. He pulled her down and kissed her. I promise you, Clara, I will. And for the first time in 7 years, Caleb Thornton meant it. The ghost of his brother finally blessedly laid to rest. February melted into March, and with it came the slow, painful thaw of winter. Caleb's ankle healed faster than expected. Within 2 weeks he was walking without a limp, though Clara caught him wincing when he thought she wasn't looking. She never called him on it. She was learning that Caleb Thornton would push through pain until his body simply refused to cooperate, and arguing with him only made him more stubborn. Instead, she found quieter ways to help. Hot compresses left by the stove for him to find, extra cushions on his chair, meals that didn't require him to stand for long, small kindnesses that he accepted without comment, though his eyes softened every time. "You're sneaky," he said one evening, lowering himself into his chair and finding a folded blanket already positioned for his back. "I don't know what you mean." "Sure you don't." But he was smiling, and he pulled her chair close to his so he could take her hand. "Thank you." "For what?" "For taking care of me, without making me feel like I need taking care of." Clara squeezed his fingers. "That's what partners do." The word still felt new between them. Partners. Not caretaker and patient. Not protector and protected. Partners equal in everything that mattered. The ranch demanded their attention as the snow began to recede. Caleb rode out every day to check on the cattle, counting heads, looking for signs of illness or injury. The herd had survived better than expected. 28 head remained, including 3 pregnant cows that would calve in late spring. "It's not as bad as I feared," he told Clara one night over dinner. "We'll make it. Might even be able to buy a few more head come fall if the prices are right. And the barn roof? I'll finish it as soon as the weather holds." Jake offered to help. "I like Jake," Clara said, "and Mary. They're good people. Best neighbors a man could ask for." Caleb paused his fork halfway to his mouth. "Mary said something to me. Before the wedding." "What?" "She said you saved me. That your letters coming out here, all of it, she said you saved me." Clara set down her own fork. "Do you believe that?" "I believe I was dying before you got here, maybe not in my body, but in every other way that matters, and I believe that's not true anymore." He met her eyes. "So yeah, I believe she was right. You saved me too, you know. I was drowning in Boston, suffocating, and you gave me air. Then we're even." "We're not even. We're together. That's different." Clara smiled. "Better." Caleb reached across the table and cupped her face in his hand. "I love you, Clara Thornton." "I love you too, Caleb Thornton." It was becoming easier to say. The words that had once felt foreign on her tongue now flowed naturally, as essential as breathing. The first signs of spring arrived in late March, patches of brown earth appearing through the snow, the creek running faster with meltwater birds returning from wherever birds went to escape Wyoming winters. Clara found herself spending more time outside, wheeling herself around the property, learning its contours and rhythms. "I want to plant a garden," she announced one morning. "A real one. Vegetables, herbs, maybe some flowers." Caleb looked up from the harness he was mending. "All right." "Where?" "South side of the cabin. It gets the best light and we can build raised beds so I can reach them from my chair." "Raised beds," he repeated thoughtfully. "That's smart. How high?" "Waist height. I've been sketching designs." She pulled out a piece of paper covered in neat drawings. "See 4 beds each about 4 feet square. We can use rocks from the creek for the walls, fill them with good soil from the valley. Caleb studied the sketches with careful attention. You've thought about this. I've had a lot of time to think. And I want to contribute more than just cooking and mending. I want to grow things, build things, leave my mark on this place. This place already has your mark on it. But he was nodding, a smile tugging at his lips. All right, Mrs. Thornton, we'll build your garden. They started the next day. Building the raised beds was hard work, harder than Clara had anticipated. Caleb hauled rocks from the creek while Clara sorted them by size, directing their placement with the precision of an architect. Her arms ached from pushing her chair through the softening mud, and her hands grew raw from handling rough stone. But she didn't stop, wouldn't stop. Every rock she placed was proof that she could do this, that she was more than her chair, more than her useless legs. You're going to hurt yourself, Caleb said on the third day, watching her strain to lift a particularly heavy stone. I'm fine, Clara. I said I'm fine. He moved to stand beside her chair, his arms crossed over his chest. You're pushing too hard. Same as I do. Same as you told me not to do. Clara opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. He was right. She knew he was right. But admitting it felt like surrender. I just want to finish, she said quietly. I want to see it done. And you will. But not if you work yourself into exhaustion. Caleb crouched beside her chair. Remember what you told me about sharing the weight that goes both ways, Clara. Let me carry some of this. She looked at him, really looked, and saw the concern in his pale green eyes. Not pity, not condescension, just love, plain and simple. All right, she said, but I'm still directing. Wouldn't have it any other way. They finished the garden beds by the end of the week. 4 perfect squares of stacked stone filled with rich, dark soil that Caleb hauled in by the wagon load. Clara ran her fingers through the earth, feeling its cool dampness, imagining the seeds she would plant, the vegetables that would grow, the flowers that would bloom. It's beautiful, she said. Caleb stood beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. It's yours. Ours. Ours, he agreed, and kissed the top of her head. April brought warmer weather and new challenges. The pregnant cows began to calve, and Caleb spent long days in the valley helping the mothers through difficult births, caring for the wobbly-legged newborns. He came home exhausted each night, falling into bed with barely enough energy to eat. Clara worried about him. She couldn't help with the calving, her chair was useless in the muddy fields, but she could make sure he was fed and rested. She could have hot coffee waiting when he stumbled through the door. She could listen when he needed to talk about the day's struggles. Lost one today? He said one evening, his voice flat with grief. Calf came out wrong. Couldn't save it. Clara wheeled herself close and took his hand. I'm sorry. Part of the life I know, but it doesn't make it easier. He rubbed his eyes with his free hand. Mother's all right at least. She'll breed again next year. And the others? Healthy. We've got 5 new calves so far, 3 heifers and 2 bulls. They're doing good. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. There's one little heifer, brown with a white star on her forehead. She's got spirit. Keeps trying to escape the corral. Sounds like someone I know. Caleb laughed at that, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Yeah, well, maybe that's why I like her. As spring progressed, Clara's garden began to flourish. She planted tomatoes and squash and beans, herbs for cooking, and flowers for beauty. She spent hours each day, tending her beds, weeding and watering, and watching for signs of growth. The first sprout, a tiny green shoot pushing through the dark soil, made her cry. Clara. Caleb found her in the garden, tears streaming down her face, staring at a seedling no bigger than her thumbnail. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. She laughed, wiping at her cheeks. Everything's right. Look. He crouched beside her and looked at the tiny plant. That's a sprout. It's life, Caleb. Life that I helped create. I put a seed in the ground and it grew. Do you understand what that means? He studied her face, and slowly understanding dawned in his eyes. It means you're not broken. It means I can still make things grow, still bring something new into the world. Clara touched the delicate seedling with gentle fingers. For so long, I felt like everything I touched turned to dust. Like I was only capable of loss and destruction. But this, she smiled through her tears, this proves I was wrong. Caleb sat down in the dirt beside her chair, not caring about his clothes. You were never broken, Clara. Not in any way that mattered. Maybe not, but I believed I was, and that believing was almost worse than the truth. She looked at him, at this man who had seen her at her worst and loved her anyway. Thank you for helping me see differently. You saw it yourself. I just gave you the space to look. They sat together in the garden as the sun set, surrounded by the promise of new life, and Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Wholeness. Not the wholeness of a body that worked perfectly, but the wholeness of a soul that had found its place. May arrived with warm winds and longer days, and with it came an unexpected visitor. Clara was in the garden when she heard hoofbeats approaching the cabin. She looked up to see a fancy carriage completely out of place in the rough Wyoming landscape pulling into the yard. A driver sat on the box, and behind him, peering through the window with an expression of barely concealed disgust, was a face Clara had hoped never to see again. Her father. Clara! Edward Whitmore stepped down from the carriage, his expensive boots sinking into the mud. Good God, look at this place. I knew it would be bad, but this is beyond anything I imagined. Clara's hands tightened on the wheels of her chair. What are you doing here? I've come to bring you home, of course. This absurd adventure has gone on long enough. He looked around the property with disdain. I received word that you'd married some frontier ruffian. The family is mortified. The family? Clara's voice was flat. The same family that wanted to lock me away in an institution. That was for your own good. You were clearly not in your right mind running off like that. But I'm prepared to be forgiving. Edward moved toward her, reaching out as if to take her hand. Come home, Clara. We'll have this marriage annulled. You can live quietly with your aunt's successor, and we'll never speak of this again. No. I beg your pardon. I said no. Clara wheeled herself backward out of his reach. This is my home now. That man you called a frontier ruffian is my husband, and I have never been more in my right mind than I am at this moment. Edward's face reddened. Clara, be reasonable. You can't possibly want to spend your life in this hovel married to some illiterate cowboy. Illiterate? A new voice cut through the air, cold and hard. Reckon I can read well enough to know a pompous ass when I see one. Caleb was walking up from the barn, his stride easy, but his eyes dangerous. He'd clearly heard enough to understand the situation. Ah. Edward's lip curled. The husband, I presume. That's right. Caleb stopped beside Clara's chair, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. And you'd be the father who wanted to lock his own daughter in an asylum because she embarrassed him. How dare you? No, how dare you? Caleb's voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath the calm. You come here to our home and try to take my wife away. You think I'm going to let that happen? This isn't about you. This is a family matter. Clara is my family, the only family I've got. Caleb put his hand on Clara's shoulder. And she already told you no. So I think we're done here. Edward sputtered, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. This is outrageous. I'll contact the authorities. I'll have this marriage dissolved. On what grounds? Clara's voice was steady, now strengthened by Caleb's presence. I'm of legal age. I married willingly. I have ownership of this property equal to my husband's. There's nothing you can do, Father. Nothing legal, anyway. You own... Edward stared at her. He gave you ownership. He did, the day I arrived, before we were even married. Clara lifted her chin. That's the kind of man he is. The kind who sees me as a partner, not a burden. Clara, you can't possibly. I can. I have. And I would do it again in a heartbeat. She reached up and took Caleb's hand where it rested on her shoulder. Go home, Father. Go back to Boston, and your reputation, and your society friends. But don't ever come here again. Don't write to me. Don't send messengers. As far as I'm concerned, I have no family but the one I've made for myself. Edward stood there, opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then he turned his movements jerky with fury and climbed back into his carriage. You'll regret this, he called through the window. When this savage life breaks you, when you realize what you've given up. Goodbye, Father. The carriage pulled away, wheels churning through the mud, and Clara watched it go. She expected to feel something: anger, sadness, the ache of severed ties. Instead, she felt only relief. Are you all right? Caleb asked softly. I'm better than all right. She turned to look up at him. I'm free. He crouched beside her chair, bringing them face to face. You were always free, Clara. You just didn't know it yet. I know it now. She cupped his face in her hands. I know it because of you. He kissed her then, right there in the yard where her father's carriage had stood moments before, and Clara felt the last chains of her old life fall away. That night they sat on the small porch Caleb had finally finished building, watching the sun set over the mountains. Clara leaned against her husband's shoulder, his arm warm around her. I should have told you he might come, she said. I knew he'd find out eventually. I just hoped that he'd leave you alone. That he'd accept my choice. Stupid of me, I know. Not stupid. Hopeful. Caleb pressed a kiss to her hair. There's a difference. He'll try again. He doesn't like losing. Let him try. He can't touch us here. Can't touch what we've built. Caleb's arm tightened around her. This is our land, Clara. Our home. No one can take that away. Our home, she repeated softly. The words still felt like a miracle. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged one by one, filling the darkening sky. In the distance, a coyote howled, and closer by the new calves bawled for their mothers. I've been thinking, Caleb said finally, about the future. What about it? Well, the garden's coming along, the herd's recovering, the barn roof is done, and the cabin's got the new porch. He paused. Seems like maybe it's time to start thinking about that addition we talked about. The extra bedroom. Yeah. He was quiet for a moment. For children. If you still want that. Clara turned to look at him. In the fading light, his face was soft, hopeful, a little scared. I still want that, she said. More than anything. It might be complicated. With your legs, I mean. The pregnancy, the birth. I know. I've thought about it. Talked to Mary about it. Clara took his hand. It won't be easy, but nothing worth having ever is. We'd need help, a doctor maybe, or a midwife who knows about. Mary knows a midwife in Cheyenne, a woman who's helped other mothers with challenges like mine. She said she'd write to her, make arrangements. Caleb stared at her. You've already been planning this. I've been hoping for it. Clara smiled. Isn't that what we do? Hope for things, then work to make them happen? He laughed that surprised laugh that she loved so much. When did you get so wise? I learned from a stubborn cowboy who taught me that second chances are worth fighting for. He pulled her close and kissed her long and deep with all the promise of the future they were building together. When they finally broke apart, they were both smiling. Mrs. Thornton, Caleb said, I think we're going to have a good life. Mr. Thornton, Clara replied, I think we already do. And as the night settled over their little homestead, as the stars wheeled overhead, and the wind whispered through the spring grass, Clara Thornton felt something she'd stopped believing she could ever feel again. Complete and utter happiness. The summer that followed was the sweetest Clara had ever known. Her garden exploded with live tomatoes ripening on the vine squash, spreading their broad leaves across the raised beds, flowers blooming in riots of color that attracted bees and butterflies from miles around. She spent her mornings there, dirt under her fingernails, sun warm on her face, feeling more alive than she had in years. "You've got a gift," Mary said during one of her frequent visits, admiring the neat rows of vegetables. "I've been gardening for 15 years and never got results like this. I just listen to what the plants need. That's the gift, Clara. Most people don't know how to listen." The herd grew too. The spring calves thrived, and Caleb managed to buy 10 more head at a good price from a rancher selling out to move back east. By midsummer, they had 43 cattle grazing in the valley, more than they'd started the year with. "At this rate, we'll have 100 head by next year," Caleb said one evening, pride evident in his voice. "And then what? And then we keep building, add more land maybe, hire a hand to help with the work." He grinned at her across the dinner table. "Become respectable ranchers instead of hardscrabble homesteaders." "I like being a hardscrabble homesteader." "So do I. But I like the idea of being able to give our children something even more." Our children. The word sent a warm thrill through Clara's chest. They'd been trying for a baby for 3 months now without success, but neither of them was discouraged. These things took time. Mary had assured her of that. "When it happens," Mary had said. "The good Lord works on his own schedule, not ours." Clara believed that. She had to believe it. Because the alternative, that her body was too broken to carry a child, was something she couldn't bear to consider. It was August when Clara first noticed something was different. She woke one morning feeling strange, not sick exactly, but off somehow, like her body was humming at a frequency she didn't recognize. She dismissed it at first, attributing it to the heat or the previous day's work in the garden. But the feeling persisted, and then came the nausea. "You're looking green," Caleb said at breakfast, watching her push food around her plate without eating. "I'm fine, just not hungry." "You're never just not hungry. You eat like a ranch hand." He leaned forward, concern creasing his brow. "Are you sick?" "I don't know. Maybe." Clara set down her fork. "I've been feeling strange for a few days, tired, queasy. My body feels different." Caleb went very still. "Different? How?" "I can't explain it. Just different." She looked at him, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "What?" "Clara." His voice was careful, measured. "When was your last monthly—" The question hit her like a lightning bolt. She counted backward in her head, then counted again, certain she must be wrong. "6 weeks ago," she whispered. "Maybe 7. Caleb was across the table in an instant, kneeling beside her chair, his hands gripping hers. "Clara, do you think—" "I don't know. I don't want to hope too much in case. We should send for Mary. She'll know what to look for." "Caleb, it might be nothing. I could just be late because of stress or the heat, or you could be carrying our child." His voice cracked on the word child. "Please, Clara, let me send for Mary." She looked into his pale green eyes, saw the desperate hope there, and nodded. Mary arrived that afternoon, took one look at Clara and smiled. "Oh, honey," she said, pulling Clara into a hug. "I think you already know, don't you? I don't want to say it out loud, in case I'm wrong." "You're not wrong." Mary pulled back and studied Clara's face with experienced eyes. "I've seen enough pregnant women to recognize the signs. The pallor, the nausea, the way you're holding yourself." She smiled wider. "You're going to have a baby, Clara Thornton." Clara's vision blurred with tears. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor. But if you want the midwife I told you about, Sarah Jenkins, she can come examine you properly. I'll send word today." "Please." "Yes." Clara was laughing and crying at the same time, her hands pressed to her still flat belly. "I can't believe it. After everything, after all the doctors who said, "Doctors don't know everything." Mary squeezed her hands. "Your body is stronger than they gave it credit for, just like you." Caleb burst through the door at that moment, unable to stay outside any longer. Well, what did Mary say? Clara looked at her husband, at this man who had given her everything, and felt joy rise up in her chest like a wave. "You're going to be a father," she said. For a moment, Caleb didn't move, didn't breathe. Then he crossed the room in 2 strides, dropped to his knees beside her chair, and buried his face in her lap, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "A father," he managed, his voice muffled. "I'm going to be a father." Clara stroked his hair, her own tears falling freely. "We're going to be parents, Caleb. We're going to have a family." He looked up at her, his face wet, his eyes shining with more hope than she'd ever seen there. "I love you. God, Clara, I love you so much. I love you too." She cupped his face in her hands. "Now stop crying, or you'll make me worse." He laughed at that, a broken, joyful sound, and pulled her close. Behind them, Mary was crying too, dabbing at her eyes with her apron. "I'll leave you two alone," she said. "But I'm sending word to Sarah today. She should be here within the week." "Thank you, Mary, for everything. That's what family is for." Mary smiled and slipped out the door, leaving them alone with their miracle. The pregnancy was not easy. Clara had known it wouldn't be. The doctors in Boston had warned her that her condition would make carrying a child difficult, that the strain on her body could be dangerous. But knowing something intellectually and living through it were very different things. The nausea lasted well into her 4th month, leaving her weak and exhausted. Her back ached constantly from the strain of supporting her growing belly while seated. She couldn't move as freely as before, her wheelchair becoming more confining as her body changed. But she endured. For the baby. For Caleb. For the family they were building together. Sarah Jenkins, the midwife from Cheyenne, came twice during the pregnancy to check on Clara's progress. She was a practical woman in her 50s, with steady hands and knowing eyes, and she'd helped dozens of women with difficult pregnancies. "You're doing well," she said during her second visit in Clara's 6th month. "The baby is strong. I can feel it moving." "Is it safe with my legs with everything?" "There are no guarantees in childbirth, Mrs. Thornton, but I've seen women in far worse condition than you deliver healthy babies." Sarah's eyes were kind, but honest. "The birth will be challenging. Your muscles don't work the way they should, which means pushing will be harder. But we'll manage. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, and we always find a way." "What do I need to do?" "Rest when you can. Eat well. Let that husband of yours take care of you." Sarah smiled. "And trust your body. It knows what it's doing even if you can't feel all of it." Clara tried to follow that advice. She rested, more worked less in the garden. Let Caleb take over the household tasks she'd claimed as her own. It chafed at her independence, but she reminded herself that this was temporary, that the goal was worth the sacrifice. The baby grew. Clara's belly swelled, and as winter approached again, she felt a sense of coming full circle. 1 year since she'd stepped off that train. 1 year since her life had changed forever. "Hard to believe it's been a year," she said to Caleb one December evening watching snow fall outside their window. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the baby kick. "Best year of my life," he replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Even with the wolves and the blizzards and your father showing up. Especially with all that. It proved we could survive anything together. We can." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "We will." The baby came 3 days after Christmas. Clara had been having pains since the night before, but she hadn't wanted to worry Caleb until she was certain. By morning, there was no doubt. The contractions were coming faster, stronger, and Sarah Jenkins, who had arrived a week earlier to be ready, took one look at Clara and nodded. "It's time," she said. "Caleb, I need you to heat water and get me clean towels, lots of them." "Is she going to be all right?" His voice was tight with fear. "She's going to be fine, but I need you to focus. Can you do that?" Caleb looked at Clara, saw her face twisted with a contraction and something hardened in his expression. "Tell me what to do." The hours that followed were the longest of Clara's life. Sarah had been right. Pushing was nearly impossible. Clara's muscles didn't respond the way they should, and every contraction required her to fight her own body. She screamed until her throat was raw. She gripped Caleb's hand until her knuckles turned white. She prayed and cursed and pushed with everything she had. "I can't," she gasped at one point, exhausted beyond measure. "Sarah, I can't do this." "Yes, you can." Sarah's voice was calm and steady. "You've survived things most people can't imagine. This is just one more battle, Clara, and you're winning." "It hurts so much." I know it does. But your baby is almost here. Just a little longer. Just a few more pushes." Clara looked at Caleb, kneeling beside the bed, his face pale with terror, but his eyes burning with faith. "You can do this," he said. "You're the strongest person I've ever known, Clara. You fought wolves for me. You can do anything." Something surged in Clara's chest, not strength exactly, but something deeper. Determination. Love. The absolute refusal to give up. She pushed, and pushed again. And then finally, after 16 hours of labor, a baby's cry split the air. "It's a girl," Sarah announced, her voice thick with emotion. "A perfect, healthy girl." Clara couldn't speak. She could only reach out with trembling arms as Sarah placed the baby on her chest, a small, squirming, miraculous creature with a shock of dark hair and a cry that seemed to shake the very walls. "A girl," Clara whispered. "We have a daughter." Caleb was crying openly now, tears streaming down his face as he looked at their child. "She's beautiful. Clara, she's so beautiful." "She looks like you." Clara touched the baby's tiny face, overwhelmed with love so fierce it frightened her. "She has your hair. And your stubbornness. Listen to that cry." Clara laughed through her tears. "She's going to give us trouble." "Good. I wouldn't have it any other way." They named her Hope. It seemed fitting somehow. This child born of hope, nurtured by hope, arriving in a world that had tried to convince both her parents that hope was foolish. Hope Thornton. The name felt like a promise and a rebellion all at once. The weeks that followed were a blur of feedings and sleepless nights, and the overwhelming learning curve of new parenthood. Clara had never felt more exhausted or more alive. Every time she looked at her daughter, she felt the same surge of wonder that had hit her that first moment. This was real. This was hers. This was the family she'd traveled 2,000 miles to find. "I wrote to my father," she told Caleb one evening as Hope nursed at her breast. "You did? I wanted him to know he had a granddaughter, and that I forgive him." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" "Not entirely. Maybe not ever. But holding Hope, I understand something I didn't before. Fear makes people do terrible things. My father was afraid of scandal, of uncertainty, of anything he couldn't control." Clara looked down at her daughter's tiny face. "I never want Hope to know that kind of fear. I want her to grow up believing she can do anything." "She will. With you as her mother, how could she not?" Spring came early that year, melting the snow and flooding the valley with wildflowers. Clara spent hours on the porch with Hope in her arms, showing her daughter the world she'd been born into. "See the mountains?" she would say, pointing to the distant peaks. "Your father and I came here with nothing, just hope and determination. And look what we built." Hope would gurgle and wave her tiny fists, and Clara would laugh and hold her closer. It was during one of these moments that it happened. Clara was sitting on the porch, Hope in her lap, when she felt something she hadn't felt in almost 4 years. A tingling in her legs, a faint, almost imperceptible sensation of warmth spreading through muscles that had been dead for so long. She froze, afraid to move, afraid to hope. "Caleb." She called, her voice strange. He appeared in the doorway immediately. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I just—" She swallowed hard. "I need you to hold hope for a moment." He took the baby, his expression confused, and watched as Clara gripped the arms of her wheelchair with trembling hands. "Clara, what are you?" "Hush. Just give me a moment." She closed her eyes and concentrated, focused on the sensation in her legs, on the tingling that was growing stronger. She remembered what the doctors had said after the accident, that there was a chance, however slim, that with time and effort, some function might return. She had given up on that possibility years ago. But now, with her daughter in her husband's arms and her garden blooming, and her life fuller than she'd ever dreamed possible, Clara Whitmore Thornton refused to accept limits. She pushed down on the wheelchair arms and lifted herself up. Her legs shook. Her knees wobbled. Pain shot through muscles that hadn't been used in years. But she stood. For one glorious, impossible moment, Clara Thornton stood on her own 2 feet. "Clara!" Caleb's voice was a broken whisper. "You're standing. You're—" Her legs gave out and she collapsed back into the chair. But she was laughing, crying, shaking with the enormity of what had just happened. "Did you see that, Caleb? Did you see?" "I saw." He was beside her in an instant, hope still in his arms, his free hand gripping hers. "My God, Clara, I saw." "I stood up. I actually stood up. You did more than that. You showed our daughter that nothing is impossible." Clara looked at Hope, who was watching her with wide, curious eyes that seemed to understand far more than any baby should. "I'm going to walk," Clara said, and her voice was fierce with certainty. "It might take months, it might take years, but I'm going to walk, Caleb. I'm going to stand beside you, not sit beside you. I'm going to dance at our daughter's wedding." "I believe you." And he did. After everything they'd been through, how could he not? The months that followed were the hardest of Clara's life, harder even than the pregnancy, harder than the birth. Learning to stand, to take steps, to force muscles that had atrophied to work again, it was agonizing, frustrating, and slow. But Clara refused to give up. Mary brought her crutches that Jake had made specially carved from strong ash wood with padded handles. Sarah Jenkins returned to help design exercises that would strengthen Clara's legs. And Caleb was there every step of the way, catching her when she fell, encouraging her when she despaired, celebrating every tiny victory. The first step came in July, one halting, trembling step across the cabin floor. The second step came easier. By Hope's first birthday, Clara could walk the length of the porch with her crutches, her legs shaking, but her smile radiant. "Look at you," Mary said, tears streaming down her face. "Just look at you. I told you I'd do it. You did. And I never should have doubted." Clara looked around at the people gathered on her porch, Mary and Jake, their daughters, Sarah Jenkins, who had come all the way from Cheyenne for the celebration, and Caleb holding Hope on his hip, his eyes bright with pride and love. This was her family, not the one she'd been born into, but the one she'd chosen, the one she'd fought for, the one she'd crossed 2,000 miles to find. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "All of you, for believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself." "That's easy to do," Caleb said, crossing to her side. "Believing in you is the easiest thing in the world." He kissed her, then right there in front of everyone, and Clara kissed him back with everything she had. Behind them, Mary was laughing, and Jake was whistling, and Hope was clapping her tiny hands. Later that night, after the guests had gone, and Hope was sleeping in her crib, Clara and Caleb sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one. "1 year ago today, I stepped off a train and into your life," Clara said softly. "I was scared and broken and sure that I didn't deserve anything good. And now I know better." She turned to look at him, this man who had changed everything. Now I know that I'm not broken. I'm just built differently. And that's not a weakness, it's a strength. Caleb took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. I'm glad you got on that train, Clara Thornton. I'm glad you placed that advertisement, Caleb Thornton. Even with the wolves and the blizzards and your father, especially with all that, it made us who we are. He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, looking out at the land they'd built together. The cattle grazing in the moonlit valley. The garden she'd planted and nurtured. The cabin that had become a home. And somewhere inside, their daughter slept dreaming dreams of a future neither of them could imagine yet. I love you, Caleb said. I love you too. Simple words. But they held everything: the past they'd survived, the present, they'd built, the future they'd create together. Clara Thornton had crossed 2,000 miles to find a home. She had faced blizzards and wolves and rejection. She had fought her own body and won. She had loved and been loved in return. And in the end, that was enough. That was everything. The cowboy had made one Christmas wish, and she had appeared on the morning train. But what happened after was no miracle. It was choice and struggle and determination. It was two broken people refusing to stay broken. It was love built not on dreams, but on the hard, beautiful work of living. Clara Thornton had come to Wyoming Territory seeking a second chance at life. She had found something far greater, a life worth living, a love worth fighting for, and a home that no one could ever take away. And that, in the end, was the greatest miracle of all.